Let's just put it this way. I would stay in a loveless marriage just to make sure I could be with Lena every day. That's how much I love Lena.
For nearly 3 decades, one woman has opened her eyes before sunrise, sat down in front of a camera, and made millions of strangers feel like they were catching up with an old friend. She has done it through marriage, motherhood, grief, public criticism, and now her own body telling her to slow down. At 55, Kelly Ripa's life looks nothing like the easy coffee and banter image she's built her career on. Underneath the laughter is a woman who has quietly absorbed one loss after another, and who is only now starting to let the cracks show. Kelly Maria Ripa was born on October 2, 1970, in Stratford, New Jersey, a working-class town far removed from Hollywood. Her father spent his career driving a bus and later became a union president, while her mother ran the household. There was no family connection to open a door for her in entertainment. She left college to chase acting, a decision that unsettled her practical blue-collar parents, and spent years auditioning, taking background work, and absorbing rejection before anything close to a break arrived. That break came in 1990, when she was cast as Haley Vaughn on the ABC soap opera, All My Children. Daytime drama rarely gets respect from critics, but for anyone inside the industry, it is one of the most grueling training grounds in television, with actors memorizing dense pages of dialogue overnight and turning around a full hour of finished programming almost daily. Ripa spent more than a decade there, and by every account from people who worked alongside her, she treated the job less like a stepping stone and more like a craft to master, showing up early and knowing her lines cold. What people often miss about that soap opera decade is how much of her professional identity was forged there. Daytime actors are some of the hardest working people in the business, expected to deliver polished performances on almost no rehearsal time, and Ripa thrived under that kind of pressure rather than being worn down by it. The trade-off, though, was steep. She spent her 20s trading ordinary milestones for a career that hadn't fully arrived yet, building something brick by brick with no guarantee any of it would hold. What kept her showing up wasn't just ambition. It was a work ethic she credits to watching her father clock in for a job that demanded reliability over glamour, an instinct that followed her onto every set she worked afterward. In 2001, that discipline carried her into an entirely different kind of pressure, co-hosting the desk once occupied solely by Regis Philbin. Taking that seat meant inheriting an audience's decades of loyalty and proving live 5 mornings a week that she deserved to be there. She didn't just prove it once. She built an entire era of American daytime television around it, staying at that desk through partnerships with Philbin, then Michael Strahan, then Ryan Seacrest, and now her own husband, becoming one of the most consistently employed personalities in the industry. That kind of longevity rarely comes without cost, and for Ripa, the toll started at home. In 1996, she married her All My Children co-star Mark Consuelos in a spontaneous Las Vegas ceremony. The couple went on to raise 3 children, Michael, Lola, and Joaquin, while both maintained demanding careers in an industry that offers little patience for the ordinary chaos of raising a family. Ripa has talked openly over the years about what that balance actually required of her. Showing up camera-ready before dawn after nights spent tending to a sick child or handling whatever crisis a young household throws at a parent, then still needing to be sharp, warm, and quick with a joke the moment the cameras rolled. There is a particular kind of exposure that comes with a bad morning when your job is live television. Most people get to have a rough start to their day in private. Ripa's rough mornings had the potential to play out in front of millions, which meant the harder parts of raising 3 kids while working full-time, the exhaustion, the guilt over missed school events, the friction that comes with any marriage under pressure, mostly had to stay off camera, tucked behind a persona built on being effortlessly upbeat. Her children are grown now. Michael works in entertainment, Lola has built a career across modeling and writing, and Joaquin has moved into acting. Watching them become adults has clearly been a point of pride for her, but it has also marked the quiet end of the chapter of her life built around a full, noisy house. Alongside the pressures of motherhood, Ripa has spent decades absorbing a different kind of scrutiny, one aimed squarely at her body. Tabloids have spent years speculating about her weight, her workout habits, and her diet, treating her physical appearance as a subject open for public debate rather than something that belonged to her. At one point, a bikini photo her husband posted online drew a wave of criticism from people who felt a woman in her late 40s had no business being photographed that way, prompting Consuelos to publicly defend her discipline and work ethic. It was one moment among many in a pattern that has followed her for most of her adult life, in which her leanness has been framed alternately as admirable and as suspicious, as though a woman in her 40s and 50s simply should not look the way she does without some hidden explanation. Ripa has pushed back on that narrative repeatedly, explaining that her fitness routine is less about vanity and more about having the stamina to survive a job that demands she be alert and engaging before most people have had coffee. She has spoken candidly, including on her own podcast, about specific procedures and treatments she has used to manage the physical toll of decades in front of a camera, choosing honesty over the denial many public figures default to. That candor has made her relatable to audiences, but it hasn't stopped the commentary. Male co-hosts across daytime television have rarely faced anything close to the same level of scrutiny over their appearance, which says something about the uneven demands placed on women who choose to build a career in front of a camera for 30 years. What makes that scrutiny especially striking is how normalized it became over the years, treated as simply part of the job rather than what it actually was. An invasion into something that had nothing to do with her work. Every red carpet appearance, every candid photo, turned into an open invitation for strangers to weigh in on a body that belonged to no one but her. There is a particular unfairness baked into an industry that expects women to look youthful and effortless while simultaneously criticizing any visible effort to get there. Ripa has walked that line for the better part of 3 decades, facing commentary if she looked tired and different commentary if she looked too polished, with seemingly no version of herself immune from judgment. It raises an uncomfortable question about what a public career actually costs a woman over multiple decades, and whether audiences who tune in every morning for comfort and familiarity have ever fully reckoned with what they were asking of the person providing it. Public scrutiny is one kind of weight to carry. Personal loss is another, and it found Ripa in a devastating way in the spring of 2020. John Callahan, her former All My Children co-star and a friend of nearly 30 years, died suddenly at 66 after suffering a massive stroke. Ripa broke the news to her live audience herself, visibly emotional, describing him as one of the funniest people she'd ever known and admitting she'd had a genuinely difficult weekend processing it. Their friendship traced back to the very beginning of her career, to the soap set where she'd learned the fundamentals of the industry, which made his death feel like losing a piece of the person she'd been before any of the fame arrived. The timing made the loss even harder to metabolize. Callahan died in the early weeks of the pandemic, when the usual rituals that help people grieve, funerals, gatherings, the simple presence of friends, were largely unavailable. Ripa had to sit with that loss in near isolation, all while still hosting a live show every morning and finding a way to greet her audience with some semblance of warmth. The situation was made more complicated by the fact that Callahan's ex-wife, actress Eva LaRue, is the godmother of Ripa's eldest son, and their daughters were close in age. The grief rippled through 2 families at once, and Ripa found herself supporting friends through their own mourning while carrying her own. On air, she apologized to viewers for seeming distracted that day, a small moment that captures something bigger about her job. Even in real grief, there was an audience waiting to be entertained. 5 years later, loss found her family again, this time closer to home. In February 2025, Ripa and Consuelos made the painful decision to say goodbye to their Shih Tzu, Chewy, who had been part of their household for nearly 18 years. Chewy wasn't an ordinary pet in that home. She had been adopted through an on-air segment on the show itself back in 2007, meaning she had effectively grown up in front of the same cameras that documented the family's life. When her health began to decline rapidly with a loss of appetite, severe dehydration, and neurological symptoms, the couple made the difficult call to have a vet perform humane euthanasia in their own apartment. Consuelos opened the show the following morning by walking the audience through what had happened, calling it one of the hardest decisions the couple had made together. As he spoke, Ripa sat beside him and eventually broke down entirely on live television. She later described how present Chewy had been for nearly every milestone in her children's lives, watching each of them leave for college and then return home to a dog who was always waiting by the door. Weeks afterward, Ripa posted a tribute on social media, admitting she had put it off because acknowledging the loss publicly made it feel more real. She wrote about still catching herself looking for Chewy out of habit, still calling her name, a raw and unpolished admission that stood in sharp contrast to the composed, camera-ready version of herself audiences have known for 25 years. Grief has a way of resurfacing in unexpected forms, and just over a year later, Ripa disappeared from her own show again, this time because of her own health. In the summer of 2026, longtime viewers noticed she was absent from Live with Kelly and Mark for an extended stretch. Consuelos eventually explained on air that his wife had undergone gum graft surgery, a procedure to correct gum recession that her dentist had actually recommended 5 years earlier, and that she had put off. He described her as someone who famously tolerates pain well enough to skip Novocaine at the dentist's office, which made it clear to him just how uncomfortable this particular recovery was, since her doctor had placed her under strict orders not to speak while she healed. A rotating group of guest hosts filled in during her time away, and fans who had gone through the same surgery flooded the show's social media with sympathy, describing their own recoveries as brutal and something they had dreaded putting off for years. For a woman whose entire professional identity has been built around dependable, daily presence, even a short, medically necessary absence stood out as a departure from the norm. It was a reminder that the version of intimacy her audience has grown used to, built on decades of watching her react in real time and share small details of her life, depends entirely on her showing up, and that even she is not exempt from needing rest. There's a certain irony in the fact that a woman known for shrugging off pain, someone who has openly joked about skipping anesthesia at routine dental visits, finally met a recovery serious enough to sideline her from a job she has held onto through marriage, motherhood, and middle age. It wasn't a crisis in the dramatic sense the tabloids usually chase. It was something far more relatable. An overdue procedure put off for years the way so many people put off their own health finally catching up with her. In some ways that ordinariness is what makes it land. The woman who has spent 25 years being the reliable, upbeat constant for millions of viewers had to admit, however briefly, that her body needed the same grace she has always extended to everyone else. Taken individually, none of these moments amounts to a single dramatic scandal. There was no one incident that defines her story. What defines it instead is the steady accumulation of things that come with getting older in public. Friends who pass away too soon, a pet who was part of the family for nearly 2 decades, a body that eventually demands attention after years of being pushed to perform on command, and children who grow up and leave the house that once revolved around them. Ripa's career has arguably never been more secure. She remains one of the most trusted and consistently working personalities in American television, a rare achievement in an industry known for turning people over quickly. But the life surrounding that career looks very different than it did even 10 years ago. The house is quieter. The dog who greeted her family at the door for 18 years is gone. A close friend from the earliest chapter of her professional life is gone too. And her own body has started sending signals that resilience alone isn't enough anymore, that rest and care have to be part of the equation. There is something quietly moving about a woman who built her entire public identity around always showing up, for her show, for her family, for an audience of millions, now facing a stage of life defined in part by absence. The empty rooms where her children used to be, the quiet at the door where a familiar dog used to wait, and the unfamiliar experience of letting her own recovery take priority, even briefly, instead of powering through for the cameras. At 55, Kelly Ripa is not a woman who has fallen apart. She is a woman who has spent her entire adult life processing loss, pressure, and change in front of an audience that mostly only sees the smile. Her story is a reminder that the people we welcome into our living rooms every single morning are carrying full, complicated lives that rarely fit into a segment or a headline. If this gave you a deeper appreciation for what she has quietly carried over the years, consider subscribing for more honest looks at the real lives behind familiar faces, and let us know in the comments which part of her story surprised you most.